Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Grad School Buddy. First of all, you can't see me but I'm smiling so hard because this is our first episode that we're recording physically. For every other guest, they have been in different locations and we've had to record online. And today's guest is the first person I'm seeing in person. So I'm very excited.
I make an effort.
Today's guest is somebody I'm really excited to talk to, especially because she brings a different perspective that we have never had on this podcast, which is the STEM perspective. And I will begin, as usual, by reading her bio, after which I'll give her the opportunity to introduce herself to the listeners and tell us a little bit more about herself. And this is somebody some of you, or a lot of you probably already know. So let's go. Grace Chimezie, thank you for joining the podcast today.
Excited to be here.
Grace Chimezie is a program associate for the Information and Media, Leadership and Communities and Governance Practices. In this role, Grace supports work across practices to help bridge gaps with the development of cross-sector approaches, particularly those that support and influence policy with systems change. Grace's project areas of focus include the impact of Fellowship Summit, gender, countering disinformation and misinformation in Jordan. Across IREX's practices, Grace's work is to identify gaps and opportunity that support leadership and policy development projects in a range of settings. Before joining IREX, Grace worked at NDI, promoting technology tools in support of democracy. She led the digital communication strategy for NDI's Open Internet Fellowship Program, designed for democracy, and provided research support for donor-sponsored projects in Nigeria, Kenya, and the Philippines. In addition, she worked as a conflict research journalist covering the Boko Haram crisis in northeastern Nigeria. Grace holds an MA in Communications, Culture and Technology, an interdisciplinary program from Georgetown University, and a BA in Mass Communication from Bingham University.
Why do I feel like I'm collecting an award?
I'm also smiling at you like you're collecting one. I think the only natural thing is to bring out like an award at this point.
Yeah. I think the only other update I'll make to that is that I'm now currently a research and evaluation officer, no longer a program associate.
Okay.
Good.
It's specifically that growth that we want to talk to you about today. We want like younger people, if there was Grace from 10 years ago and she had a podcast she could listen to, this is that place. That's what we're trying to create for the younger people. So we're really excited. So Grace, something we like to do in the podcast is we like our guests to kind of like introduce themselves to the guest outside the podcast, outside the bio that we just read. And the reason is because we know that sometimes, our bios can be a little rigid and they talk a little bit just about the work that we do professionally. But then I also understand that we are people even outside the work that we do. So like, is there anything you'd like to tell us? Maybe specifically about Gafa Sandals.
A lot of people always come out to say, oh, Gafa Sandals. But yes, outside of my work, I am a designer and I have a footwear line in Nigeria called Gafa Sandals. And our profit proceeds go towards helping out-of-school children in Northeast Nigeria. I also enjoy fashion a lot. And I love to read and I love tea. I feel like, as you said, Toni Morrison would also support that we are not the work we do, we are the people we are. And so I try to keep that mantra about myself.
That's really interesting. So, I actually knew about Gafa Sandals, but I didn't know about the fact that the proceeds go to, out-of-school children in northern Nigeria. Was that something that you had, when you thought of the original business model that you wanted? Like, was that something you had right from the get-go? Did something happen and you realized this is a gap and this is a way I think I can fill this gap with the project that I already have?
Yeah, so when I started Gafa Sandals, I just wanted to be able to find an outlet to express myself, but also because I identified that young people in Nigeria, we are not getting designs that felt very unique to the continent and also could survive our terrain. So most people relied on Zara and ASOS for their items, but we knew that those slides or slippers, as we call them, or sandals, could only last a couple of months. And so I decided to create something that could last at least 3 years and upwards for people. The original idea wasn't necessarily to get the profit proceeds to support out of school children. However, I am not someone who tries to do things I enjoy for profit. So when I saw that that was lucrative, I also realized that the people who I was working with to create these items had younger siblings, and we also had young boys who would come to the shop to just sit down and didn't have like a primary education. And so what I thought about was, if we are making enough, we could just have these boys also learn skills, but at the same time pay their way through primary and secondary school. And I'm glad we've been able to do that for 10 boys right now.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
So basically the way and I know this is not the main reason why we're here. It's just something that you said that really caught my attention, because I'm really interested in education and education finance, especially because I say this so many times, but education changed my life. So it's literally what I know. So when I hear of people who have initiatives that kind of give back to people who like want to go to school, whether it's like formal or informal, I'm really excited to know more about it. So do you guys look for, external donors, or do you primarily, it's your sort of like hope that you would be, because obviously these 10 boys now, they you've given them the hope that, hey, like you can actually go to school, and you don't want to take that away from them next session. So how have you guys been able to like keep it sustainable?
Thankfully, we've had customers who would consistently patronize the brand, and as long as we have that, we won't take away that hope from these boys. But also I've personally sort of made it my own decision to support them with the salary I get out of the company. So I basically don't use my salary for anything outside supporting these young people. So we try to once in a year sort of highlight what we do, but these days I haven't found time to put around a story around that. But
it's beautiful you're telling this story now. So hopefully this will be like something that will also get attention to people. Okay, so one thing I noticed was that as soon as we came into this compound, you were a little bit excited, tiny. And for people who don't know, Grace and I are currently sitting on the Georgetown University campus. This is something that we have in common, aside the fact that we are both Nigerian. We are both Georgetown alums. And I know that Georgetown is a place that you're sentimentally attached to, both the school and the location. And so how did you find the communication degree in Georgetown? Did you know about it? And did you choose it because you knew it was a STEM program? Because the people this podcast is for is basically, people who are trying to be very creative in their approach to looking for grad school programs, especially people who are mindful of the fact that if you do a non-STEM program, you only have the 1 year OPT. But when people hear about STEM, they think like physics, chemistry, mathematics, like things that seem for people who don't consider themselves to have the heavy math or quant skills, like they find it to be very, very scary. So how did you find this niche? And how have you been able to, how did you find Georgetown?
I want to consider myself very lucky because I initially wanted to do a journalism degree at UPenn, University of Pennsylvania, and I sort of thought about how I had mentors in Nigeria who used to say, Grace, you're very good at computer. You started coding way before people were even conscious of all of these things. What ways do you think you can explore that? And I knew I didn't want to do computer science, but I also knew that I was doing I had a footwear business, and I was also lecturing at that time, and I wanted to find a way that I could combine all of those intersections and experiences into a graduate degree. And so I started looking at interdisciplinary programs, and that was how I was able to find Georgetown. So it was the idea of interdisciplinary. And at the time I got to Georgetown, our program was not yet recognized as a STEM course. And before I graduated, we were recognized as a STEM course. So that was it's one of those things that you see as you being lucky, but also at the same time knowing that, like, I had to think about how I was going to curate the degree to be STEM focused while still pursuing, the other interests that I had.
That was very, very nice. I love especially, when you talked about curating your degree, because something I try to explain to people is the need to work on, like, it's cool to get into a cool school, like a school that's very popular. But I think something else that's really important is, the courses that you take, the electives you take, the portfolios that you create from the courses you have. So when you were thinking about curating your courses, how did you think about that? Did you go on LinkedIn and find people who had similar roles that you wanted and you said, okay, these were the courses they did? Or did you talk to people in your program in older years? What was your strategy?
So I want to be like Burna Boy and say, nobody said the pace for me. But
okay.
I think I'm just one person who have an idea as to how I want to build my life and try to find ways. Mm-hmm. But I would say that I spoke to my academic advisor. That's a resource that is there for people to explore, and these people are there to help you or guide you to degrees or to programs that you see yourself taking. And so when I got to Georgetown, I realized that there were people who were creating their degrees solely at law school. Mm-hmm. Some were doing everything at business school. And I thought about what paths that I would take that I could find easy entry, because the truth about it is that you have to be truthful to yourself and tell yourself, these are the chances I have if I follow this route. And I knew that I did not have a technical background, and if I said I wanted to pursue like a degree in data science completely, my chances and opportunities after I had graduated would be very slim. And so I realized that going through the non-profit route would be a very easier entry route, because then it would mean that I had the technical skills that non-profit lacked, but I was also coming with an experience of communication and also policy. And so that was what I did. I started to take classes in the School of Public Policy, and I had spoken to my advisor to be able to get me into those programs, because I couldn't just register them by myself, and she was able to do that for me.
Okay. So I think like two things that you said that were very, very important that I think people should definitely like not overlook. Number one, being truthful to yourself, because it's the same thing for me. I found out where my strengths were. I realized that I am an exceptional writer and I am an exceptional visa, and I decided to just stay on my lane and leave the people who love to do the heavy math crunching to do it. I think in everything it's just about like the synergy in the team that matters. And the second thing that you talked about is the like utilizing your advisors. I think especially in grad school, it's very easy to feel like overwhelmed and not even settle down to say, okay, who is my advisor? Like, what can I ask this person? What kind of help or services can they render to me? So definitely please make use of the services that your school provides. It's very important. Okay, and then something else I'm very curious about is like, before you came to Georgetown, had you ever been to America? Has this ever been like, why and how did you decide on America? And something that's very similar to that question, because it's about your life before Georgetown, is before you came to grad school in general, what was a day in Grace's life?
Hey, that's interesting. The first question, have I ever been to America? No, I had not traveled out of Nigeria. I had not gone to Ghana. I had not gone to any other country. I was just a Nigerian, and I think
That's so cool.
Yeah, because I feel like, and that was because my parents, although my dad is well traveled, we weren't, and that's something I just feel sad about, because I feel like if I had traveled, I probably would have navigated other things better. But it was my first time coming to the US. And I came by myself. And so that was like really an adventure. But prior to coming to the US, a day in the life of Grace was wake up in the morning, make sure that I had like my lecture notes ready, and I used to drive 2 hours from Abuja to Nasarawa to lecture. So that was like a day in my life. But also I had to get the inventories of people who had ordered Gafa Sandals and pair of Gafa Sandals. And then once that was done, I would go to class and lecture. And after that, I was also sitting as a student advisor. So I had people who would come to the office for like student issues. And then I was also co-opted to teach literature in English. And then I had to start figuring out my life around that. But then after that, I would have to drive back and drop off deliveries and orders for people who had placed an order for Gafa Sandals, because as of that time, I did not have a team, and I was the only one doing that all by myself. And then I was also sort of supporting and still stringing along my journalism career and my fashion blog. And so I had to like organize my weekends for photos. And so that was kind of my life. It was everywhere, and I knew that I would get back home by 9 and sometimes 10 and sometimes 11 and sometimes 12 in the morning, and my dad would just flip out. And I also worked as a drama ministry person, so I had to do that during the weekend. So were
you in charge of like creating the storyline?
No, nobody should give me that. No, I was just there to be my best self and enter any role that I was placed in. And funny enough, I actually won an award for that. So,
ooh. Yeah. Okay, so I think like I think every time you say something, we learn like 50 million things about you. So the thing that I want to pick up on right now is the fact that you were a lecturer and you were working on Gafa Sandals. You were creating storylines for your drama team, even though you're trying to convince us that's not what happened. You know, you had so many things that you were doing. And I know that sometimes when people who are multi-talented or people who have like multiple interests talk about the many things that they do, it sounds interesting. But when you leave it, it's very exhausting. So how were you able to cope with all of that, especially like when you decided, hey, like everything I'm doing right now is great, you know, I love that I started it, but I really want to go to grad school. How were you able to combine all of that and deal with the whole application process? And another question is like, how were you able to survive as a young lecturer in Nigeria? Because I know that sometimes like being young, in quote, like, and being a lecturer, you have some students who are close to your age or even older than you, and you know there might be that friction. So how were you able to navigate all of that?
Okay, so let me see if I can remember the first question. The first question is, how was I able to say, oh, I'm going to leave all of these things I'm doing to move for grad school? I think I knew by the time I was graduating from undergrad that I was going to travel for my grad degree. Mm-hmm. So whatever else I was doing was just me living up to every potential. And once I think of something I am capable of doing, I'll try to do it. And so when it was time for me to leave, the only thing I didn't want to leave behind was the footwear. I just knew that there were people who were feeding through that, who had started building family through that. And I didn't want to pull the rug from under them. And so what I did was to start to work towards like having a team, and those were the people who supported that. And so the hardest part was putting my team, but I tell people this, that I've been very lucky to have communities around me that are honest people. And so I knew that I could trust the people I was leaving the company to run under. And some of them were people who had bought Gafa Sandals from me initially and just loved the brand and were willing to do anything to make sure that I wasn't going to close it while I was leaving. And other people were just people who really loved creating. So creating that team, making sure that we had filed under CAC and also gotten like a limited liability company, and then opening a bank account and making sure that there were signatories to those bank accounts, not one, not two, but 3 people. And just kind of creating all of those things and having taxes, just laying the groundwork to know that once I leave that, I'm able to do any other thing I needed to do from my own end outside the country.
Okay.
And the second question was, how did I cope being a lecturer?
How were you able to balance it all?
Oh, balance. So the thing about it's so hard because I'm not the most organized person, and definitely some things will suffer. But also, if you don't want things to suffer, you don't sleep. And I didn't sleep. So
I'm laughing because I know that you don't mean that as a saying. You mean it literally.
Yes, you don't sleep. Yeah. people don't know, but you don't sleep. So yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much for sharing, stories about your life before you left Nigeria to the United States. I want us to kind of like shift gears a bit to your life here in America. I know that's something that a lot of people think is that once you go abroad, all your problems fade away. And part of this podcast is I want people to know it's a lie. It's not fading. And for some people, a lot of things that you struggle with will even be amplified. And so I just wanted you to kind of like talk to us about some of the things that you struggled with when you were a grad student. So, what are some things you would say that you struggled with when you came to the US? And what are some coping mechanisms that, for somebody who's just coming to the US, hey, these are some things that you might run into and this is how you can navigate it?
I think one of the first things I did before I even got to the US and when I knew that I had gotten admission, because I had to defer for a year, Nigeria's Naira had crashed and I just had to figure out my life, and I also had to take care of my family because I'm the firstborn. But what I did was to find someone who was at Georgetown. I went on Twitter and I was like, who goes to Georgetown? And then I found this guy called Kwabena. Shout out to Kwabena. Kwabena has been my guardian angel. He was one person who was able to, when I got to this country, sort of lay groundwork of, I think this is what you should do. He got me my first blanket, got me my first Georgetown water bottle, and he was just very encouraging in moments when I needed it. And one thing people don't realize when you move here, for me, it was like, I think all the confidence I had built in Nigeria faded away, not just because I came to the US, but also the process of coming here was very dehumanizing for me. And so I felt like I was starting from the scratch, but also not just starting from the scratch, but having to look at myself as this person who didn't have anything anymore. So that was very challenging. And I think my self-confidence was the one thing that this country took away from me, that I'm still like working to rebuild. I don't know, what was your other question?
You know what, you were telling me about this and I was so into it.
So yes, but I think
I was asking you, like for somebody who was coming, how would you suggest that they cope with it, some of the struggles that you have?
Yes, so I think the first thing is to actually start to look for a community before you arrive. Reach out to people on Twitter, reach out to as many people as you want to. Don't be like me. I feel like I didn't know this, but I got to this country and realized that I was a very stoic person. The friends I had in Nigeria, the friends I have now, I haven't necessarily expanded my cycle to be more than what I initially had. But I do know that having friends, like people like Kwabena who were helpful, if I had like 4 Kwabenas, I probably think life would have been very easy. But building that community prior to coming to the US would be very helpful. And I think that's one of the, and I believe once you get to Georgetown or the schools that you are, request for resources that are available to international students. Therapy can be helpful. Again, your student advisor would be a very helpful person to always talk to about challenges. And if possible, journal. I think going back to seeing your story and the progress you're making may be a very good way to cope.
Thank you. I definitely support journaling. I think everybody who has talked about journaling, I'm like, I definitely support journaling. But there's this app. It's not really an app. It's something online called Future Me. It allows you to send letters to yourself in future. So, there are some times that I just randomly get letters from myself in the past about, something that was driving me crazy. And I thought, this is the week I die. And, I'm like, oh my God, like, this was such a big deal then. But, I got over it. So definitely, I agree that journaling allows you to see how far you've come in the process. And it allows you to be kinder to yourself. And definitely, like, 2 things that you talked about, going on Twitter. I think sometimes people think that putting things on Twitter is just shouting into a void. But once in a while, you find that one person who is listening in that void. And they just pick you up. So definitely, like, please, like, use the social media as a tool to kind of connect and interact with people. And also, like, trying to build a community is something that I would also say is top tier advice. I have been trying to convince my friends to relocate. That's my friend making strategy. So I definitely understand what you mean. And I know that's something something a lot of people will be very curious about is, like, even with all the struggles that you had, you were still able to rely on your team in Nigeria, like, to come through with the Gafa Sandals, and most importantly, to maintain the objective that you set. And they were able to maintain that. And there are people who might be thinking of, starting something, or people who have already even started something. What would you advise them? What would be your entrepreneurial advice to them?
So I'm going to say from my own point of view is you had to start as early enough to identify people who are rooting for you. There's nothing, if the people that you bring to your team are not rooting for you, do not have the same thoughts towards you as you have towards yourself, there's only so much you can do. There's no business plan and strategy you put behind that wouldn't make it fall. So I think I'm just very thankful for that. I have people who genuinely root for me, and I think because of they root for me, they take that same energy to the business. And you also have to just genuinely be a good person, because if you're not a good person, people are not just going to stand up for you when they find that whoever they're standing up for does not deserve it. So that's what I would say. And then also identify the people very early enough, and do the things, the legal things that are required to keep your business running while you're away. I registered my company, I paid my taxes, and so when I wanted to monetize my website to make sure the payment channel were working, I was able to do that very easily. I got someone who would. I have someone who is on our tech team who supports the integration process. I have someone who does the delivery chain. So I had all of those people, and I can trust these people 100%.
Okay, it's very funny because you said something about not being a very organized person, and here you are having all these systems going, and that's really cool. So something that I know that a lot of people are very, like, when people come to school abroad, they're not just schooling because a lot of times it's also to kind of improve the jobs that they get after they're done with school. And so what was that process for you, like finding a job, finding an internship? I know that one thing you talked about was the fact that you were very intentional about the way you curated your courses. So what skills did you have at this point where you were facing the job market that kind of helped you with the jobs that you have? What was your experience like?
My experience wasn't so great. I would be very honest. I think there are more people who have it better than me, because I didn't realize this, but my writing was very shitty. And it was still shitty even in grad school. And it was not necessarily a fault of mine, but I realized that 10 years ago when the Boko Haram crisis hit, and I got involved in that bomb blast accident, that I had started to lose my memory, and I wasn't paying attention to that. And so when I came to Georgetown, I realized that I had to start doing the work of relearning. And so that was very difficult for me. But one thing that I did know was that I already had existing work that I had done in Nigeria prior to that bomb blast that could show that I had worked in the non-profit space looking at conflict. And what I did was just to keep trying different areas. And when I was creating my courses, I made sure I did stuff in innovation, I did stuff in tech policy. And when I was applying, I started to look for organizations that were working in that area, but also needed someone with a methodological thought view of that. And so I think one thing I'd advise anybody is take a methodology class, a statistical methodology, whatever methodology class. Even if you're doing communications, do a methodology class, because when you do a methodology class, you start to lay a groundwork for knowing how to do research. And so with that, you're able to show people that this is your thought process around thinking about solutions. And so that was what helped me. But initially, I also had to do jobs that at Georgetown, thankfully, I was able to apply to the tech, to being a teaching assistant for a tech class. and that was like getting that was able to boost my confidence. And when I was applying to other jobs, I was just like, well, I was already a teaching assistant for a tech program, so if I'm applying for this role within a non-profit, I should also be looking at tech roles, because that is a space that has very slim entry, and people who have those experiences like have better chances of getting in. And so that was what I did. But also, I think taking a volunteering job at the World Bank was a very good thing to do, because though it was not paid for, I met very wonderful people, and those people were able to offer the recommendation that I ended up getting for my paid job. And so that was kind of the process around that. And then when the pandemic hit, I was out of job, and I started to think about what are the ways that I could increase my luck, because I had stayed like almost 5 months without really doing a job that I really wanted to do. And so what I did was I had to start taking methods courses online, but it was not just a methods course that I would take myself. I had to do it with communities. So I went to Acumen and started taking their 6 weeks, 5 weeks courses. And those courses actually make you come up with a project at the end that was very tangible. And so I was using that as a leverage to apply for the jobs, and that was how I got what I was doing now.
Okay, first of all, that was like so much tea. So I want to just like go through all the points that you listed again. In the first place, you talked about the fact that you took a lot of innovation and tech policy courses. And so this is very, very solid advice, because I know that innovation and tech is also something that has helped me. And then you also talked about, the need to take methodology classes, and the fact that you volunteered strategically, because, like the World Bank volunteering opportunity was something that really helped you. And I know that you also shared with us. First of all, I want to say thank you for being very vulnerable and sharing with us, the good and the not so good, because I think the stories are important. I think sometimes people see profiles from LinkedIn, or they see you on Twitter, and they're like, oh wow, you did this for 2 years, then you went and you did this for 3 years, but they don't see everything in between. So I really appreciate it, when people come on this podcast and they tell us the story as it is. Thank you so much. So something I really want to ask you about is, the time when you were unemployed for 5 months. So unemployment is something that I have faced in Nigeria and in America, and both times it sucked big time. And I know that you said that, when you were during this time where you were, not that you were unemployed, I think you said you were working on a job that you didn't really like, you didn't think this was what you absolutely wanted to do. I know how it can feel to be in that space. You're in this dark place, but you're supposed to be grateful, and so how were you able to be, I don't want to use the word resilient, because it will make it seem as if you were, but how were you able to lift yourself up, even the days when they weren't the brightest days, you weren't the happiest, you didn't really feel like putting in the work, but you had to get up and do it, and not for just one day, or sometimes it would extend for weeks. How were you able to do that? And how were you able to find the courses? I know you said you had to go to communities like Acumen, but did you know this like beforehand?
So I don't know, I tell people this thing that like I can be depressed, but in my depression I'm looking for ways to thrive. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that I was being resilient in those situations. I think I was just looking for ways to thrive. I wasn't in a good place, but then also felt like I didn't need to be in a bad place and still not do anything about it. So what I did was to go online, and I think deliberately I wanted to improve my writing. And so I found that window was an opportunity for me to improve my writing. And so I created a Medium page, and I started reading a lot of articles, and I also started writing about them. And I also found tech platforms to contribute to, and I started writing for those tech platforms. And then I also went online and I said, oh, what other interests does Grace have? And I realized that I also like public health. And so I started looking for courses in public health. And that's how I found the Acumen course. And it's so interesting because when I did that acumen course, I worked with 3 wonderful women from India and South Africa, and I think one other country, Kenya, yes. And we were able to come up with a research that was what I used to interview at Johns Hopkins. And I almost got a job, but because I didn't have a degree in public health, I didn't. But then it was like just finding every avenue to thrive, but also using the internet as the internet was created for an information resource. So that was what I did, and I was thankful that I did that. But I wouldn't say that I necessarily was thriving, but I just made sure that even in the situations where I wasn't comfortable, that I found something in myself to be proud of.
Thank you. And normally I was going to ask you where people can find resources, but I think that you have done a great job of sharing it just by telling us about your experiences. Definitely using the internet, using LinkedIn, using even Twitter. I tell people who are interested in economics that #econ Twitter will send you diving into a rabbit hole of even jobs or research that people are doing that's new that you probably don't know about. So definitely. And something that I notice about you is that you're very self-aware and you're very blunt with yourself. But it's like you're blunt, but you're telling yourself this thing not to hurt yourself. You're just telling yourself this is what I found out and this is how I'm solving it. And one of the examples, that I can think of right now is when you talk about your writing. You talk about it yes, I found out that there was a problem. It was a huge problem, and I was able to solve it. How do you get to this point where you discover? Because I think one of the best things we can do for ourselves as human beings is to be truthful to yourself. If you suck at something, when you close the door, tell yourself, hey, guy, that you suck at this. So how are you able to come to this point of self-awareness where you tell yourself, these are the things you are struggling with, and this is how you can make it better?
That's a good one, and that's a tough one. I am a very reflective person, and I have realized that in my reflectiveness sometimes I may be too hard on myself, but it's also an opportunity for me to look at ways that I can do things better. And so what I do is I know I'm a good reader. I can identify good writers, which makes me know that I have the potential to be a good writer, right? And if I look at writing pieces of people that I think wrote a great report and I put it in comparison with myself and I did not feel like I had done a good job, that was one way of me knowing that, okay, there's room for improvement and growth. And no matter what people would read that same piece and say, Grace, oh my God, you're such a good writer. And I'm just like, what are you guys saying? So yes, and I also knew that if those writings were not opening the doors that I expected them to open, then that was not good writing. Because good writing takes you places. Good writing opens doors. Good writing, there's a lot of things writing will do for you that, okay, I'm all right. So that was the one where I don't know if I had answered that question and if you had another one that I'm still missing out.
No, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going down to the last questions of this interview because today is Saturday and it's one of the beautiful Saturdays in DC, and I don't want Grace to spend it all in this in our little hideout. Let's not rat ourselves out. Okay, so something that I'm really interested in finding out for people, especially people who are just moving to places like DC, is about accommodation, because accommodation is really expensive in DC. Accommodation is really expensive if you go to schools like Georgetown, where the graduate students don't have, there's no campus for us. So how have you managed to navigate finding housing both as a student and now as a young professional / mid-career professional?
I think there was something you pointed out when you said I'm very honest with myself, and yes, if I look at my budget and I know that I, as a student, I am broke. Yeah. You have to humble yourself. Mm-hmm. And I know that, to be honest, the internet contributes into ways people put themselves in situations that become very burdensome. Yeah. So what I did when I got to this country was to look for undergrads who had access to the housing on Georgetown campus. And I was like, Could we pair together and get a housing?
Oh,
And yeah, that's what I did, and I stayed on campus for 1 year with like Georgetown undergrads. You're gonna be crazy, but like it's gonna be fun too.
Why didn't you tell me?
Did you ask?
That's so cool.
But yeah, that is one way that I've navigated that. And even like, and also like once you do that, also make sure that you're able to be in contact with the Indian community here, because they are not, like, I don't know about you, but there's not a lot of Nigerian community here in Georgetown.
Wait, excuse me. What do you mean you don't know about me?
Before you came.
Am I in another Georgetown?
Before you came, there was very few,
Yeah, we're still with you.
So you want to pair with other international students, or how they call them here, minority populations, who have communities that are larger than yours and have found ways to thrive. And you want to be with their friends, and those people will be able to. So that, like, for me, when someone from Nigeria who was my student was coming here, I was moving out from my apartment, and I just made him like take that over. And so that is one way. Like, as I said, if it's possible to build your network before you come to the US, you have reduced the burden of figuring things out by yourself by at least, if not 50%, 30.
Okay, so this is why we have this podcast, because even me, so that this is supposed to be my alma mater, I did not know all of this. The only thing I did know is that we aren't many Nigerians, which is why when I saw your profile the first time, I was so excited, because you were one of the few people. I think I probably know 2 more Nigerians aside you. So it's yeah, we are quite few. Okay, and then how have you handled networking in the DMV? I mean, like, when I think of networking, I mean in 2 different categories. So I mean networking, like, how do you meet development professionals like yourself who are interested in like tech space and innovation and the things that you're interested in? And then the second hand, like, how do you navigate U Street and H Street? How do you find the people that you go hiking with, or you go, like, the things that you love to do? I don't know what you love to do. Let me not project. I'm here telling you the things that I love to do. How have you managed, like the social part of networking and the professional part of networking in a nutshell?
So I like how you think that I actually go out.
I know, you gave me the look.
Don't be like me, because I feel like people have found life, are living their best life in DC because they've gone out, and I'm just always in my house. Don't be like me. But outside that, for networking, I think the first thing I did was to join a club here at Georgetown. We started one called the Georgetown Tech Policy Initiative that has gone on after us. But join clubs that would allow you meet new people when they invite them from outside of your campus to come and speak, and you now belong to a club of people who are part of those who would sit down with them after everyone is going to just debrief or something, and then you get access to that. But also what those clubs do is they bring people from other different departments and programs to become part of a club that everyone has a shared interest. And so you also start to build your network from there. But also attending conferences. Once you attend conferences, you get to meet new people. You get to hear from people who are like you, people who are not like you, and you kind of start to grow your network from there. Other ways are when you get your first internship or your first job, you want to find the 2 people who you can start to build strong networks with, because these people are going to write your references, and you want to be able to have communities that you can rely on. And that's, I'm telling you guys, what worked for me. But also, like, because I don't really go out, which is a very bad thing. I really hope I can change that. I find that using Twitter as a way of like just reading people's articles and writing out what I think about it and copying the authors have been a good way that I've expanded my network. I don't think that has helped me to get any physical job, but then it's just helped me see the new people doing things that I enjoy, and to just get inspired.
Okay, so you said at your job, network with people, attend conferences. While you're in school, be a part of organizations. I really support this one 100%. And, stay after the organization, after the event is over, to actually network with people. And then reading people's articles and asking them on Twitter. I think sometimes, I'm just like, will this person really be in the mood to engage? This person is having the boring Tuesday afternoon, and then attend them.
I think it's still fine. It's still like, sometimes I do that not because I want to engage, but it's also just a way to tell them that I recognize their work. But then it's also people who follow you understanding that these are the things you enjoy too. So sometimes it's not necessary, but just to tell people that I saw your work and I like it, because I know if someone does that to me, it would make me feel good.
I have actually never looked at it from that angle. So now that you've said it, I will be a more mindful reader. Okay, so I do have like a few more questions for you. Okay, so one thing, I said that we had 2 questions to hold myself accountable, because I know how I can always have questions. But one thing you talked about that is very important, especially for like people who are just starting off their careers, is conferences. Some people don't even know what to expect in conferences, especially with the COVID-19. So many people have only attended conferences online. So when this is you advising somebody who is in grad school, they are just about to attend their first conference, what would you tell them to look out for? And how would you tell them is the best way to network? Because one thing I try to tell people is, like, in networking, you don't want to be annoying. You don't want to just, you go and meet somebody and then you don't have even the first few sentences like, hey, like, maybe I saw you from XYZ, or this is how I know about you. Just being able to say that, So what would you advise a grad student in this situation? Like, what would you tell them that this is what you're going to expect and this is what you should do?
I think the older I get, the more I see that you learn from mistakes, but also I am thankful my mistakes have not put me in a position that I can't come out of. And so when it comes to conferences, I am just recently understanding that you enjoy conferences when you have something to contribute, and also when you have a research that even though you have not presented, you can speak to speakers about after that conference, right? And so all the conferences I've attended in this country, I either went there volunteering from my department, so I was just there to be, let's say, note taker for the experience. The second time was to become a director for the National Academy of Sciences. I was just responsible for sifting through the applications that were sent in for like presentation. And now I am attending the conference. Okay, I've organized the conference, and now in next week actually, I'll be attending a conference as a presenter. And so I think I've transitioned from all of these stages because I've been able to understand what conferences feel like when you're an outsider, because you just go there, and even if you want to network, if you don't necessarily have something tangible that connects you to that conference, you become an outlier and can feel very boring and bland. And so I think one of the first things I advise people is either go to a conference because you have questions concerning a particular subject or field or area that the conference is trying to address, or you are presenting yours, that way you can talk with other speakers, or you have your own research findings that even if you're not presenting, once a conference is over, once a speaker stops speaking, you can actually share a PDF file of your paper and say, we are working on similar areas. Do you think we could probably publish together or speak over this over coffee? Or just kind of pick their brain on that particular subject. And I think that's the best advice I can give.
I definitely like the ideas you shared about, how to make the most of conferences. Number one, like going to the conferences that you're interested in. And number two, like if possible, like presenting or having something to contribute to the entire process. But then also, even if you're not presenting, having something you can also converse with people about, because I think like having conversation points, especially when it's something similar, it's such an easy way to get talking with people. So definitely thank you for sharing that. Something I really am curious about is, you talked about the fact that you're kind of in a more research-centric role right now, and I know that there's also like a little data, it's like at the intersection of data, and you have experienced like growth from the first job that you had when you came to the US to where you are now, like to even the point where you're about to present at this conference next week. And so my question to you is, like how, number one, what is a day in the life of a research officer? And what skills would you say that these are the things that come up every day that this is something you definitely need to have to succeed or to excel in this role?
So being a research and evaluation officer depends on because right now I work for a research organization that implements programs on behalf of the US government. And so it depends on the role or the program that you guys are running. And so for some people, the most basic skill of research and evaluation officer is probably being able to write surveys, being able to analyze surveys, being able to present results from those surveys or data points, right? And so when I joined my organization, I knew I was very skilled in video editing and other things, but I also knew I had taken a course in statistical methodology and I like statistics, and I wanted to know how to explore my data skills. And I mentioned that to my supervisor. And so what she did was, every time there was an opportunity to take a data learning course, she would say, Grace is very interested in that. I think Grace should do it. And I took my time to do all of those courses. And so being able to do that consistently for a year, our technical team noticed that I was very good at that and asked me to support them to training the second cohort. And knowing that I really wanted to get myself promoted to a senior managerial position, I knew that those skills were important. And so not only did I do that, I started taking courses again. You guys, I love courses. And so I started taking data courses and completing them on Data Camp. And what that did was that once an opportunity opened up for a research and evaluation officer for the Ford Global Foundation, I saw that within my organization, I was the only, then as a junior staff, I was the only one who had competencies to take up that position. And so in my day-to-day tasks as a research and evaluation officer is gathering analysis from the tools that we use to work with fellows, and also using that to design better program products for fellowships.
Okay, so if you have ever wondered what a research and evaluation officer does, you're welcome. Thank you for coming to our TED Talk. But something that I really noticed is the fact that even before opportunities present themselves, you go out of your way to be prepared, and that is something that is very, very important. I think that people think sometimes people are lucky, but the truth is that people put in a lot of work that we don't see. And so when we see things clicking, it's like, how did you think of this? But it's been months of background work that we hadn't considered. So
the one thing I tell people this, sometimes it's not about the hard work, it's about doing the work you need to do. Like work smart that's what I would say. So look at the things that your time and chance has allowed you to do, and do them, so that when the opportunity presents itself, you are well positioned to take them.
This for real. I'm going to give you like two questions in one, and that's the last question for real. But the two in one question is that I think I only have one online course where I started, and I'm like, we die here. So how do you do this where you start an online course and nobody You don't have to report to anybody. It's between you and your God. So how are you able to decide, I will finish this course? How do you keep yourself accountable? And the second thing is, like, do you have any random advice? Now, it doesn't even have to be something like very serious. It could be like lick ice cream 3 times a week. It could be something very random. So tell us. And then if you're feeling moved, because I know that this is that question where I'm trying to hip it all.
Yeah.
You can also tell us about just like navigating, like finding love, and like outside everything professional, like for people who are interested in like finding relationships, what should they do? And if you feel like you don't want to tell us, we should go out in the streets and find out ourselves. That's also okay.
Okay. The first question was, how do I hold myself accountable? I'm actually proud that I remember your questions, because I forget things easily. How do I hold myself accountable? I think one thing I do is I look at my screen time every week. And whenever my screen time is above 6 hours, I ask myself, of what benefit was it? And so I tell myself, if I'm able to make time to be looking at my phone, I should be able to make time for self-development. That's when I have sense these days. And that's when I'm settled and calm. So if people are in a position in their life where they're a little bit comfortable and can take on new challenges, I think they should. I think for me, as much as I'm a reflexive person, I'm also very hard on myself. And so whenever I think about like what are the chances that I have for success, or how can I change my lot, I personally put myself through tough situations and make sure that I complete them. The second thing you asked was I should give people random advice. The random advice was actually fall in love. It's such a weird advice coming from Grace, but please do. Your life would be better for it, because when things get tough, you have someone to talk to. And life is life is beautiful with love. Don't let the internet deceive you. Don't let Grace deceive you, because the next answer to this thing is actually going to be opposite of that. So listen to me now and then listen to the next answer. Navigating love. I've been single and then talking to people. That's how I don't think I've been in love in good 6 years. I have met people that I found interesting, and I thought, it would be nice to talk to them, but I haven't fallen in love. Navigating that, I really just think that people should love themselves first. And anytime, I'm going to give you an advice, you don't have to take it. Anytime you find, and I think a quote I saw the other day in a poem made me phrase this answer better. Every time love feels like war, I hope you choose yourself. So that's my answer.
Okay, so I love the way you gave them advice, like if love feels like war. You don't also want to tell them, like, where to find this love. Where can they find it? Where should people go? Where should grad students go to find love? And people who have just relocated for work, young people like you that are working in like places like yours.
You want to put me in trouble? I am not an expert in this thing, because I don't have any successful relationship to boost to come and tell people where to find love. However, I think social media platforms still, like, I think when I was in grad school, all the babes were finding their boyfriends on Tinder and Bumble and the rest, and I was like, you guys, those platforms work. So yeah, people have found their relationships and partners there. I think another thing that is very profitable is probably painting. Go for all of these weird ass things, painting, swimming, I don't know. People find their partners when they find hiking. I'm in my house, and I don't think that is a very profitable thing that people should do. So yeah, just find the social media platforms, social dating platforms. See how old school I am.
Okay, guys, thank you. So either you go to social media or you go to the dating platform or you go outside. Shall like try and mix up with people. You understand? Okay, so thank you so much, Grace, for coming out this Saturday to come hang out with us. I feel very happy to finally meet you in person and also to have recorded this episode with you. If like people have enjoyed this episode and they want to follow you or they want to get a pair of Gafa Sandals, especially to support the work you do in Northeast Nigeria, how can they find you? Tell us.
I think I'm everywhere, so you can either decide to put Grace Chimezie or Grace Alex on the internet, and if you see any pretty girl that pops up as the first Google suggestion, just follow her.
Okay, thank you. And if you'd like to listen to more episodes of our podcast, please remember that you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at My Grad School Board. And until we see you again next time, I don't know, Shay, y'all stay safe. Bye.